Oh, I start?
You start.
Hello, everybody. Well, 50 years since the opening of Grease on Broadway, and Grease is still the word. We're very excited about our book, Grease Tell Me More, which is a collection of stories, backstage stories, from the original cast, the first national tour cast, the other touring companies, um, replacements, and it became one big family because even if you were in the original cast, you knew the other people because they would come into Broadway to substitute or replace, and vice versa. Broadway people would go out to fill in vacations or to substitute for people on the road. So everybody became a big family, and everyone stayed in touch. And we call this big celebration we just had in New York for the 50th anniversary and the release of Grease Tell Me More. We called it 50 Years of Love, and that's exactly what it was. So we're going to start with Tom. Are we going to start
Well, we're
reading?
going to start with introducing our two stars. We don't get them together that often, and so we're lucky on this book talk to have Carole Demas, who played the original Sandy, and Barry Bostwick, who played the original Danny Zuko. They
Yes,
they
yes.
are the templates on which all of their productions really have been based, and we love them. and,
If you've
and
seen the movie, you probably saw John Travolta in the drive-in scene put his hands through his hair to loosen the ring to give to Sandy. Well, Barry Bostwick started that in one of our preview performances in front of audiences. He ran his hand through his hair to loosen the ring, and it became every Danny Zuko does that, did that ever since.
and that's just one of the many many things. And Carole also found the balance of somehow making Sandy interesting and likable, because otherwise she could have been quite easily one-dimensional. So we're going to chat with them after we do a little bit of reading. But just to emphasize what Ken said, what makes it so interesting is over 100 people contributed their stories. And these were all the people that have been in, whether they were cast or whether they were crew, whatever they were doing. They sent in stories. So it was Ken and Adrienne Barbeau and my mission to interweave them together, which we've done, and we're quite pleased with, and we hope you'll be interested and take a look at it. It's unlike any other books about the theater, in that a lot of books about Broadway, but very few books cover a full run on Broadway, plus all of its national tours. And we also, which we'll talk about later, but we also introduced a number of major stars to film and television over the years. So
All of those stories are in the book by the people themselves. So you'll hear all these. Some of them I didn't even know about before. They were a little well, whatever, but fun.
So shall we read this?
So we'll start. By the way, I don't think it was mentioned, but I produced the original and Tom directed it. I think Tom was given credit for that earlier in the show. I found it as a little production with a lot of dialogue and some songs in a basement, a community theater in Chicago. And I saw my yearbook coming to life, and I thought, wow, if we rework this, and these guys really had the talent, Jim Jacobson, Warren Casey, I thought it could become a Broadway musical. And so that's how it started. And now we'll pick up in the book where we're ready to hire a director. My partner Maxine Fox and we had already talked about who the choreographer should be. I had been to Chicago. She came to Chicago afterwards to also see the production there. And now we're talking about who's going to direct this. We wanted somebody. One of the things about the show that I saw in Chicago, the minute the curtain went up, or the minute the brown paper scenery with drip marks got lit up as the opening of the show, I saw my yearbook come to life. And that's really what made it happen for me. And I think everybody in that audience that night saw their own yearbooks come to life. So I said to the authors, Jim Jacobs and Warren Casey, that we have to keep. We have to, in every choice, director, choreographer, whatever, find people who will give us that, who will make these characters look real. So now we'll begin. After meeting with a number of potential directors, I suddenly remembered a young director named Tom Moore. 2 years before, Maxine and I had attended a performance of Welcome to Andromeda that he had directed at the American Place Theater. We were knocked out by how totally real the characters were. I had to pinch myself to remember that they were actors. This is what we wanted for Grease.
Not long out of the Yale School of Drama, I was supporting myself with temp work as a typist at Sloan Kettering Hospital, basically telling people that they should pay their bills before they die. However, a talented young Yale playwright named Ron White, with whom I had earlier collaborated, had written a new play called Welcome to Andromeda, and Wynn Hanman, the artistic director of the American Place Theater, offered us their theater for 2 showcase performances.
When Maxine and I decided to form our producing partnership, we took a full-page ad in Variety. The headline read, "Can you use 2 producers with the following experience?" We proceeded to list the logos of the various shows that we had worked on in different capacities. The ad appeared in the April 16th, 1969 edition of Variety. Immediately, the phone started ringing.
Bob Satcheloff, a close friend of the playwright, saw an ad in Variety placed by producers asking for new material and immediately called Ron's agent, who quickly called the young producers.
One call was from a legitimate New York agent, Ellen Newwald. She represented a playwright named Ron White. His play, Welcome to Andromeda, was being performed at a weekend showcase at the American Place Theater.
Welcome to Andromeda is a 2-character play about a quadriplegic who wants to kill himself and the nurse who spends the entire 90 minutes of the play trying to convince him to go on living. Throughout the play, taking place in one small room, only one of the characters moved.
Watching the play, I had to keep reminding myself, as I said earlier, that these were actors. They seemed so real, it was eerie. With one character confined to a hospital bed and the other the only character who could move, Moore created an energy level that kept it from being a static portrayal. I was also impressed by the amount of humor he was able to realize from a depressing premise. We met Ron and Tom after the performance and congratulated them.
We hit it off instantly and talked for quite some time, but that was that. Our 2 performances ended and I searched for a job, eventually ending up working with Gordon Davidson at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles.
When I spoke to the agent, Ellen Newwald, the next day, I told her we enjoyed the play but didn't think we could make it work commercially. I also told her how impressed we were with Tom Moore's work and that we looked forward to seeing him again at some point. A few months later, when I was in California, Tom and I met for lunch at the Music Center in downtown LA. 3 hours passed and we were still talking. I told Maxine later that day when I saw her that I knew that at some point we were going to work with Tom.
After my stint at the Mark Taper, I went back to New York, but less than 6 months later, feeling discouraged with the theater and wanting to explore film, I was offered a spot in the recently established American Film Institute in Beverly Hills. Several months later, however, as I was preparing to direct an AFI film project, I received a call from New York. The call came into the dean's office, as there were no cell phones in those days, and I had no permanent home. The young producers, who I now knew as Ken and Maxine, said they had a new project and wanted me to fly in and meet the writers, Jim Jacobs and Warren Casey. I remember being shocked and telling my fellow students that I had just received a call out of the blue, asking me if I would be interested in this very oddly named musical, Grease. A script was overnighted. Based on the 1-act, 2-character play that they had seen at the American Place, with no music and a character who couldn't move, and 1 3-hour lunch in Los Angeles, these intrepid producers were considering me for a big, splashy, first of its kind 50s rock and roll musical. I was in a state of disbelief as I boarded the plane.
Tom flew in from Los Angeles. First, we had him meet Jim and Warren and hear the score.
Sung mostly by Jim on his guitar, the score was kind of irresistible.
The next morning, we arranged for Tom to meet Pat Birch. Pat Birch, we had already thought, should be the choreographer because she also could take actors, make them look like real dancers. And when she did the Me Nobody Knows, an off-Broadway hit, I couldn't believe that they were performers. I thought she went up to the Bronx and got these real kids. So we took Tom over to meet Pat at her apartment. His taxi got caught in traffic, coming across town from the west side. Pat became an antsy waiting. She had a meeting scheduled with at Juilliard School with John Houseman, founding director of Juilliard's drama division. You didn't keep John Houseman waiting. Tom finally arrived.
I apologized to everyone for being late and said the taxi was stuck in traffic. But what really happened was that I took the bus to try to save money. In those days, I was eating on just a few dollars a day.
Tom and Pat sat next to each other on a couch in her living room and began talking. Maxine and I sat silently across the room. Within minutes, the two of them hit it off and were animatedly talking about the show's possibilities. Somehow, Pat's urgency about leaving to meet John Houseman vanished. It was as if they had known each other for years.
Within minutes, Pat and I made an extraordinary connection, a perfect match.
Next, we took Tom to Joe Allen Restaurant in the Theater District to have lunch with Jim and Warren, the authors.
We talked for some time and I liked them both, but I had no idea how they felt about me. I complimented them greatly on the music and gave my honest critique on the script, which I thought needed a lot of work and restructuring. After the meeting.
Did I miss a page? What happened to my book here? I'll blame it on the publisher.
It's not the publisher. I think it's the producer. It's a
Yeah, here it is. I did skip a page. Sorry. Yeah. After the meeting, Maxine and I drove Tom to the airport for his flight back to Los Angeles. In the car, Tom expressed very positive, enthusiastic feelings about Pat Birch, saying he'd love to work with her. However, he had big doubts that he was the right director for Grease. He wasn't attracted to the 1950s and hadn't connected with the Greaser kids when he was in high school. He found the characters in Grease unlikable. I told him he'd make them appealing through his work with the authors on the book, his casting, and his direction. I asked him to please reread the script draft on the plane.
I got on a plane and the doors closed. I looked at the script and started to read it again, this time clearly realizing its possibilities, and I began to panic. What have I done? I've turned down my chance at a New York production. This could be one of the greatest mistakes of my life. Mildly hyperbolic, as I was only 27. My mind churned for the whole 6.5 hours of the flight. When the doors opened and we finally disembarked, I ran to the nearest payphone and reached Ken and said, I've reread the script, already have ideas, and if you and the guys are still interested, I'd very much like to be considered as your director.
Actually, what Tom said when I picked up the phone, I hope I didn't talk you out of hiring me. Unfortunately, we had another hurdle that we had to overcome.
Warren had something.
Warren had concerns about Tom after our first meeting. He joked maybe Tom should play Eugene, who was the sort of straight-laced character that everybody picked on. We brought Tom back to New York for another meeting with Jim and Warren and asked him to focus on Warren. Jim was very outgoing and Warren was very withdrawn. So of course it would be easy to be attracted and to have a conversation with Jim. So at the second meeting, let's see. So Tom came back and focused on Warren. They discussed things, they talked to each other, and afterwards Warren said, I like him, it'll work. And so we had a director.
Extraordinary luck and serendipity, Grease would change my life forever. And believe me, it did in every way, and not least because of all the friends that have been made through this production, which brings us back to Barry and Carole.
Yes.
I was thinking today that one of the things that fascinates me in the book is when you all talk about the auditions. And I wonder, Barry, if you and Carole could tell us what it was like auditioning for this little opus.
Well, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. It was horrendous. It was horrible. It was the worst day of my life. I don't remember much of the specifics of it, other than I had never had to be on a stage with all these other actors and interacting with them and being put together with this person and that person and doing the same scene over and over again. and sort of steeling myself to and not thinking of them, not being affected by their performances and their take on things. And I mean, I didn't do a lot of preparation. I think I learned Bebop-A-Lula on the guitar, and that was about it. I didn't have a slow song, as most actors usually have to have a slow song, a fast song, and then a monologue. I had none of that but Bebop-A-Lula, and maybe I shook my hips a little bit. I don't know, you'll have to tell me. But all I know is that when you put Carole and I together, it just seemed right. It just seemed perfect. And I just loved having her and me together in this. And it's funny that also I went to college with Garn Stevens, who played Jan in the original company. And we had actually come from San Diego to New York together to try to become actors in New York. And so it's fascinating that sort of generation of people who had first come to New York, we were in the same sphere. We were auditioning for the same things and all of that. Can I ask you a question? Meatloaf said to me maybe a year ago that he had a Grease story. Did you ever consider Meatloaf for Rump?
He came into audition, and needless to say, it was an extraordinary performance.
Yeah.
But he would have overwhelmed the show, so we never really considered it seriously. But he was a major contender in terms of talent. I mean, you knew it even then, So I don't know what his story is, but it's probably not good, is my guess.
No, I think his story was, I turned Grease down. I turned it down. I think he said, I got some other musical that, closed in 2 days, and I should have stayed and done Grease. Maybe he was going.
He's got a terrific imagination.
Yeah.
Well, I think those are the things that we have to allow actors. Just before Carole speaks here, I just want to say that it was a very difficult way of auditioning, because we were seeking actors first, and then singers, and then dancers. And what happened was they would read or they would sing first. It sometimes switched back and forth, but it was all saved to the end of the day, or in Barry and Carole's point, they had been auditioning a couple of times, and it was a whole audition, half a day, based on putting people together, mixing and matching and dancing. And it was very difficult because there was no space where we were to put them outside the room. So everyone was in the theater as we were doing it. And that's just not, that's plain cruel to actors. But as one of our actors, Walter Bobby, who plays the part of Rump, Roger, said, it also, though, was the trigger that caused certain things to happen in the room, because not only were you performing for the producers and the director, you were performing for your peers, which is the worst thing to do.
As the song says.
Yes, exactly. So Carole,
yes,
what do you remember from it?
I didn't audition very many times, I don't think. But I do remember what Barry's talking about. And he did a very sweet thing. And the other day when you were doing that reading in the park behind the library, Tom mentioned it. There's a big difference in our heights. Barry is 6'4", and I'm a little over 5'3". And the first thing you think about when you walk on stage to audition with somebody who has the kind of presence that he has is, oh my God, I'm going to just die out here. No one's even going to know I'm here. What'll I do? And Barry, he whispered in my ear and he said, Carole, he said, stand on my feet. And I thought, God, what a sweet idea. So, I mean, I still couldn't really, reach his shoulders exactly properly the way you would if you were, formally dancing. So I stood on his feet, and this is in the book. I put my arms around his neck so that we could just gaze into each other's eyes. which was an extreme pleasure. And I think, the chemistry that we offered, was there. And I realized, seeing what was going on in that audition, that people were being paired up and then repaired up, and different people were being gathered in little groups and then moved. And then obviously there was a chemistry and a physicality and a size thing going on. And I think in your minds, Tom, to try to see, how did everybody look together? Do you believe these kids as friends and as desperate kids who hang on to each other and who love each other and tease each other and all that stuff? And I also had never, I had already been in the theater by that time for 10 years, and I'd had an equity card for almost that long, and I'd never seen an audition like this. So, and my
I don't think there had been an audition.
my agents warned me. They said, Carole, they said you're going to be there all day. And that was sort of against equity rules. After they kept you for a certain number of hours, they had to pay you. But they warned all of our agents to warn us. And we were all so anxious. We'd have stayed there till the next morning. If it
Well, you have to admit, you were having fun too, don't you think?
Yes.
Wait a minute, Carole.
What?
Carole, I got paid. You didn't get paid? Oh my God.
Actually, the rule is how many times you're called in for a audition. If you have to wait around, that doesn't count.
But Barry, I did get paid. I got to stand on your feet. I got paid.
Okay. But those are the kind of things that we did, in high school. When we went to the dances in high school, you'd stand on people's feet. And in fact, I remember that the dance part of the audition, Pat, you basically said, well, just do do what you would have done if you were at a dance at the gym or in high school. And I remember that line that we had to go down. We just had to sort of do what we did at the YMCA when we were in school, and you didn't have to be tricky, you didn't have to do triple pirouettes to the knee or anything. You just had to show some personality, and the personality came directly out of what your history had been from that period. And I think it's interesting, and I think we've talked about this, is that we were probably the only cast originally that had a real sense of what it was like in the late 50s to live through this time. And I think it was really helpful for not only the chemistry amongst us, the cast, but the overall mood of the piece, I think, because as you know, as it went on, people got broader and broader and broader in performances. And I think it's because they didn't have that grounding that I think we had at one point.
Well, I've tried to, actually somebody else came up with this first, but it's absolutely accurate. And when I talk to people, I try to say, imagine as if you were reviving the millennial, the 2000s in 2022. That's pretty much the distance between us and the 50s when we did this production. So it practically was next door, because most of us feel like 2000 was just days ago.
So much happened in the 60s that it made the 50s seem like the Civil War time.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think, and Ken and Maxine, and Ken in particular, have always had an enormous instinct for somehow having their feeling on the zeitgeist of what was going on. And I would have never thought the 50s would have been of interest at that point. But they did, and that's what they encouraged, and that's what happened. And then people, of course, went crazy for it. And then it turns out, as we found out later, that the 50s never die. People keep wanting to go back to the 50s because it was a time of innocence, or what we thought was innocence.
Oh, yeah. The thing is about the show is we captured that innocence that everybody could identify with. That's why people would say to me, okay, so you're doing this. What after everybody in your generation who went to high school in the 50s sees this, who's going to come? Well, people 4-year-olds came over and over again, and then, of course, saw the movie a million times. People in my parents' generation came to Greece very quickly, and so became fans. Why? Because either it was your memory of what you went through, or you were looking at your older brothers and sisters, identifying with what they were going through, and you would. So it became very universal very quickly, and it was because of that innocence that Tom's talking about.
But you know, not only the innocence, there was also something very rude about it. But there was some language in it that probably shocked an awful lot of people, but was very right for the period. And
It was right.
and I know it. And I know that once the Grease became popular and was being done in grammar schools, that kind of stuff was cut out. Well, that's an interesting question. How did you, who made this Grease into something that could be played by real high school people and, kids and this and that? I mean, who went in and censored and created something that, if it hadn't have been done, Grease probably wouldn't have the life that it has?
Well, the nitty gritty and the language, things that you talk about in the beginning, that was not what made it universal or made people run. Yes, it was part of the texture. It was part of the icing. But the real thing was what we were talking about. So when we had to modify it, when Jim and Warren made changes as we went on, you're doing, these tours, you're doing a bus and truck that's going to go into these very conservative towns and so forth. They modified it, but it didn't really change the impact of the show. And when the movie, when Gordon Weaver, who was the worldwide marketing executive of Paramount, asked me to come over and see a rough cut at the Paramount building here in Columbus Circle, I sat through the whole thing, and afterwards I said to him, "You've turned it into bubble gum." I said, "But you were very smart, because now it'll become a rite of passage for 4 and 5-year-olds," which it did.
Well, something even more than that. I mean, going back to Barry's original thing too, though, we started with, people made fun of us, some saying, sure, it's a documentary, but we tried for a documentary approach. That it really was quite nitty gritty. It was as close as we could keep it and yet make these people likable, which is, I think, one of the reasons I was brought on the production. But it stayed nitty gritty, and it was these kids' lives. And with each production of Grease, and we certainly did that some in these, as Ken said, these conservative places, but also as Grease has been revived over and over and over again, it gets a little softer with each revival. I was mentioning that to a writer in London who was doing an article for us, and he said, "Well, aren't you guilty of being the first one to take that step?" And I had to admit, yes, I guess I was. And that was tough for the writers, by the way, to take, because these people were based on people that they went to school with, that they knew, especially Jim Jacobs. So that was tough. I want to go back just to mention one thing about auditions, though, because actors can be very modest. One of the things you also look for as a director, and then I think producers too, you look for charisma. You look for people that take the stage, because a lot of actors can come into a room and suck up the energy, and you're looking for people that you want to be around, people you want to see perform. And there are a lot of talented people out there, lots of them, but very few people can combine those two things of that charisma and that kind of talent to be able to act. And I think our history shows why that was so successful.
And people, this has been going on for years. Every once in a while, somebody's going to say to me, "How come so many major stars came out of Grease?" And, I always say, well, we had Patrick Swayze, we had Richard Gere, Mary Lou Henner, Jeff Conaway from Taxi, and the list just keeps going on and on. And most of them, ones that are alive, have contributed stories for the book. And I always say, because in order to get the kind of reality we wanted, in order to get characters that you would not think were cartoons, it required extremely good actors, because there was no chorus, extremely good singers. And Tom Moore, we auditioned over 1,500 so Tom could find these kinds of people. And it succeeded.
How many people were at that final audition, would you say? How many Dannys and how many Sandys?
I don't know. I don't remember, Ken. Maybe you do, but I don't remember how that broke down. By that point, we had narrowed it down. There were probably, when we started that day, there may have been at max 3 or 4 for every part. I mean, it may have seemed like there were hundreds, and there were hundreds when we started. But by that point, we were going for the core. We knew that those decisions we were going to make that day would determine our fate, whether we were successful or not. And I mean, I always tell this story, and I never tell the name of the actor, but they boiled down to 2 actors for Danny Zuko, Barry and one other actor who is a really fine actor and has had a, not that you're not a really fine actor too, Barry, but who's had a really terrific career. And but Barry, there was no question in the end that Barry was the guy. And quite frankly, I don't remember Carole having much competition. I really don't.
I don't either.
I mean, I just kind of remember that she was it. She was the essence. She's kind of the essence now. We all joke that we think Carole could just go on right now and play the part of Sandy. In fact, she did. Didn't you sing one of the Grease songs with somebody that was approximately a quarter of your age recently?
Remember, Carole, when you did that club act over here on 42nd Street a few years ago, and there was a young guy touring in Greece playing Danny Zuko, and here's Carole many, many, many years after she opened in Greece. Everybody thought it was perfect. I mean, they're singing Summer Nights, and it was like they could go on, had been performing and could go on performing the same thing every night. It was like the age difference disappeared completely.
I was nervous about that. But my director said, Carole, don't worry. You don't look like a child molester. So I figured, okay.
It was great.
Yes.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's very exciting. Actually, I mean, it's very exciting for me right now, just the fact that we've been gathering in all sorts of configurations, much like those auditions, but it's been much bigger groups. And it's nice to just have Barry and Carole alone, which is the first time probably I've had that since we rehearsed the individual scenes of Patty and Danny. Do either one of you remember any particular struggle in figuring out your roles?
Yeah.
Carole, you go first.
Yes, I do. And I think I've talked to Tom and Ken about this a little bit, that I was aware that Sandy was originally kind of a plot device, and I mean, look at her name, Dombrowski, for God's sake, it's really like, she just, and I thought, well, what good is that, okay, so in the end, she nails him, but I mean, I kept thinking, they have this history, and they're talking about it. She's telling it from her perspective, and he's telling it from his perspective. Well, she's telling it from, I think, her real perspective, what really happened, and he's making it up to some extent as he goes along, telling the guys what their summer together was like. But basically, what the heck were they doing together in the first place? Unless there was something that each of them had that the other really was drawn to, no matter who they were with their friends, or no matter, what the rest of their lives were like. There was something about their chemistry. They spent a summer together, and he wanted to have all of that and then go back to school the way it was. And when she shows up at school, he's completely thrown, because he's lied so much already. He doesn't know what to do with himself, and all of that's kind of fun. But I just thought, you know what? She's not just some pretty girl. She's got a fire within. She has something that he wants, something that he's drawn to. And she sees in him maybe what his friends don't see. I mean, this is what I made up for myself, as we actors call it, the backstory. But I really thought, if this relationship, this on-stage relationship, is going to work, if these characters are going to work, and if we're gradually watching them, miss and miss and miss, and then we really want it to work in the end, and when it does, it's kind of a happy ending, even though it's not at all the way you thought it was going to happen. I think then something has to happen here now and then where you see, the spark is there. And that's what I went for. I think she was really, that she wasn't just a pretty girl. I think she was a very sensual person. And I think she was a sexual person within.
I think
She
that
didn't
makes
know
a lot
what
of
to do with
sense.
it yet, but yes, that's how I felt about her. And I thought, oh, she took one look at him and she wanted him. And he wanted her. But now what do you do?
She also had a sense of strength,
Yes.
in the strength that comes out in the character throughout. And
You know, I'm sorry, Ken. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm finished. I just wanted to say that.
I think what Carole said about the fact that you brought out something in him that he didn't know he had. I think that's so much a part of adolescence, because you're playing a role with your buds and all of that to try to fit in. And I think she brought out other things which he probably couldn't have defined. This is my guess.
Well, I
But
think he did
nevertheless,
the
he
same
felt it.
for her.
Yeah, exactly.
Because she's a good girl in a Catholic school. You don't know what you really feel.
Yeah, sure. And what about you, Barry?
I just wanted a girlfriend. I just wanted
See
to
what I
have
mean?
a fun
He didn't
summer.
recognize it.
I just, I mean, those were the days, you were out somewhere. I mean, sure, he was with his family somewhere at the beach and he was isolated from his friends. And this good girl comes along and she's, she was the image of the Sandra Dee image, as she's been written. There's something so attractive about that when this was the kid from the streets. I mean, he was, I think that's what Travolta got really well in the movie. There was that innocence in his eyes. There was that, you knew he wasn't really a hood, or a gang member. There was something, there was something really nice about him. And I don't know if I was able to capture that other than just the rudimentary, things, because it was stage and I could be bigger. But in essence, yes, I agree with Carole. Would you like me to read something from the book?
Yes.
I think that'd be great.
Okay, let me, it has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, okay. And this is in a chapter of, Oh, What a Dream. Yes, you wrote it, so you remember that. Barry Bostwick Zuko. One of the major differences between our cast and all the others to follow was that the original cast was older, grew up during the end of the actual 50s. We had firsthand knowledge and we remembered a lot. Now, thanks to Adrienne Barbeau's Rizzo, I got to cop my first feel on stage during the park scene. And when it didn't get cut in previews, I got to repeat it in every single performance. I love props, and I didn't stop adding them after we previewed and opened. I thought they were inventive additions. Well, our director, Tom Moore, called them improvements, and he was quick to remove them if it wasn't integral to the scene. And later in the run, we basically were out of control. The cast was pretty bored with the same old, and being the creative creatures we were, we got more creative. And every note session with Tom began this way: Barry, no more walking on with scuba diving flippers, masks, and snorkels, or a paddleball set, or a hula hoop, or a set of jacks, or a, well, you see what I mean. What was a creative guy to do? And Tom would laugh, and then he would just cut it. He was relentless. That's what I have.
See, whenever,
I must say that's the best. I love having you read that. It gives it a whole new personality.
But what else I mean, I wasn't the only one bringing.
No.
You were.
What happens when everybody starts doing that, or as you referred to it as Tom calls it, the improvements, the show kind of dulls out. I remember having been away for a while, and I came back, and first thing I did was to check on the show at the Royale, and it was very flat, all these extra things, and Tom hadn't been there for a while. So I did two things. First thing I did was I put a note on the bulletin board to the whole cast saying, I was there last night, where were you? And the next thing was I called Tom and says, Tom, we're in trouble, you gotta get here right away, which he did immediately, and took out all the excess improvements.
You know, the thing is, you know, even now as I hear those, I mean, I would be at the back of the theater and I would be watching them, and I couldn't help but laugh, because it's not like you didn't integrate them. It's not like you didn't make them part of your thing. But if anybody that's listening to this, imagine if somebody has a paddle ball and they're doing dialogue, and so what you're having at not particularly opportune moments is a pa-pong, pa-pong, pa-pong in the middle of lines, at the end of lines. But he was creative. He did make me laugh, and I did cut it.
I remember after the incident where Tom came back and got everybody in shape, Danny Jacobson, who was playing Kenickie, who became a very successful director and writer and everything in TV, but he was Kenickie then. He came up to my office for some reason, and he walked into my office and he said, Tom was right to ball us out, and you were right to put that note up, because we had gotten lazy and we're putting in all this stuff and we were really phoning it in. He said, but we were sold out that day. I said, Danny, that day, yes, but that audience that witnessed that, how many people are they going to tell has to see it? So come a few months from now, and the grosses start going down, the attendance starts going down, it's because of things like this. He said, oh, I never thought about that.
How long did you play the show, both of you?
Yeah, I think I was only in it for like 18 months, all between that and LA and a little bit of Chicago.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And how about you, Carole? How long were you in?
I did just the first year.
Right. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing to be considered so important to something. And yet in the big scheme of the run, and of course for all of us in the big scheme of Grease's success, we were all with it a relatively short time. I mean, we just celebrated 50 years of the show, but all of us together were only doing it for 8. And now there have been 120,000 productions of Grease worldwide, which would only happen, by the way, because of you guys and us. And it's pretty amazing. Yeah, does anybody want to talk about when you were offered a chance to invest in the show?
I would, because I missed it.
Everybody missed it.
This was something that really still bothers me now that I read it. Eileen, Kristen, and I had a dressing room that was separate from everyone else. We were never with the other girls who all, were together. And sometimes announcements got made, and someone would walk into the dressing room downstairs and announce something or share something, and we never heard about it. At that point in my life, I had actually made a little money. I was married and divorced, and I had been teaching school, and I had all of that behind me. But I got lucky, and I got some television, and I also got into commercial work, and I was a squirrel about it, because I'd been through those long times when you just think you're never going to work again. So I was saving, and I had some money. If I had heard that,
How could you not have heard it, Carole? Everybody
I'm not kidding.
talking about it.
I'm not kidding. I found out about it like long after it was over.
Oh, funny.
And I can't.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And
That's
to this
really
day, I think, gee, I could use that money. Still,
Carole,
Please,
if I had known you had money, I would have asked you for a loan, because I think I saw the importance of it, but I was broke as everybody else was. Ken, what did you offer in the final analysis for a
at the
certain
very end,
amount?
when we needed to raise some additional money, we thought, well, let's give the cast a chance to participate if they want. And it was $500 per.
I wasn't rolling in money, but I could have.
Tell him though, Ken. Tell him how much that 500 would be worth now.
But it was $500. I mean, the rest of the investors have put up a lot more. But $500 we said for the cast. Let's see if anybody wants to. Well, if you had, you would have gotten a profit percentage of 12,000% profit.
That's a lot of money. Hundreds of
Well,
thousands.
you mean if
And-
you were only asking for 500? I still
Yes.
remember.
Well, remember, 72, 500 was a lot more than it is now, but that's what we were asking, yeah. The regular units were like 5,000.
So,
And the income to the investors is still going on. You know, they get checks twice a year. They get a piece of the income from the stock.
do you feel worse now, Carol?
Oh,
Are you so sorry you came on to this today?
it's too late now, isn't it? And it's not the only thing in life, you know, that you screw up and wish you'd done. I
Yeah,
have a
but go on.
I think now would be a great time for the Q&A too. We already have 2 questions queued up.
Okay.
We have a question from Bess. When you were in rehearsals, did any of you have an idea of that the show was going to be such a big hit like it is? Like, did you kind of see into the future? Did you have the feeling?
I didn't. I think it was all just new. We were just happy to have a job and be messing around in a rehearsal room. And I don't have any feeling for whether or not it was going to become what it was become. You know, and people ask me, I did this movie called Rocky Horror Picture Show years ago, and they asked me the same question. Well, did you know that it was going to become what it became? I said, no, I had no idea. It was just a one-off, you know. And it's the same thing with Grease. We were just hoping to get a few months' work out of it and to pay our rent.
Well, from the beginning, the minute I saw it in Chicago, I had this feeling, this picture in my head that if we did our job right, if we really succeeded in turning this little gem there into a full Broadway musical, I had confidence it could be a hit. Now, what was a hit back then? And what was I thinking? Well, a hit show, it might run 3 years on Broadway. You know, you send out a tour, maybe you send out a second tour. Maybe there's a film version, but that rarely happened, only once in a blue moon. So basically, that was I was thinking, if we really did our work, this is what might happen. Who could imagine that it would take over the world? I mean, there was no way to imagine. And you know, running 8.5 years, which broke all records of any show in history, wasn't you couldn't even think about such a thing back then. No.
But I've been in flops, and I was prepared for the very real possibility that this was another one, except that there was an energy in this show. There was a definite real energy. There was a love. There was an embracing of each other. There were contributions from everyone all the time. There was something really engaging about that. And I graduated from high school in 1957, so I knew these people, and they from day one, the minute we had a read through, there was a reality to me. I thought, there's something here that grabs you. I believed in it. I really did. I was ready for it not to be a success, which is why I wouldn't cut my hair, because I was really a coloratura soprano, and what if I needed it again, you know? But I still, I thought it might go.
You know, not all of your fellow cast members believe that. I don't even remember the story in the book that I think Muse Small tells, where every night as a group of them came downstairs, they'd be singing songs like "Get a Job," and
Yeah.
even on stage, one of the actors who played Sonny was telling the other actors, "This isn't going to survive. You need to get out of here and get a job." I mean, there was a lot of that going on, and there were also tears being shared, I might also say, by a number of the actors. So, so anyway, we've rambled maybe, but I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was lovely. Thank you. We do have another one. Are there any stories about recording the cast album? So do you have any memories? I think so.
There's a big one, which is not my story, but Ken's in it. and a number of people. But the night the cast albums are exhausting things to do because everybody wants to get it right for historical reasons, and indeed, we're glad they did. But they had an after party. Ken, you can probably tell this better than I
No,
can.
what happened was the cast album is very often done like right after you open, a few days or within that next week. So we were on sketchy ground. We got terrible. We did not get good reviews. We had a few, but not enough to get the approval of the media and have articles all over the place. Because if you don't get the Times in those days, all the doors shut. So you didn't get the magazines. You didn't, So we were dealing with that. I felt that we should not close the show, even though some people advised us that we should, because we were losing money. But I saw the pilot light there in the box office, and it was getting more and more people were coming each week. So I didn't want to do that. But it was still very shaky. So when we did the cast album, we didn't know whether we were going to play next week or not. We really didn't know. And as Tom pointed out, very exhausting to go through what you have to go through to get all of that done. And you do it in one period, like you start in the morning and you go way into the night. And finally, when it was over, we all went over to Pat Birch's house to have a sort of winding down. But people were really like, and all of a sudden, Jim Jacobs, who was having what we call flop sweat, because none of us knew what was going to happen, really, a week in. So he starts screaming about, he waived his royalties, but for what? Because we're going to close. And he lost it. He lost it. And started to take a punch at me. And then Jim Canning, our original duty, jumped in. I was ready to punch back, but he jumped in, pushed us aside. This whole drama, more drama than we'd had all day at the recording session. And then Jim's agents called him in and they said, "You cannot do that. You cannot punch out the producer, and you cannot scream at the other cast members like that." So it was over. We forgot about it. But everybody was really on high gear because of the tension. Here you have to work your ass off all day with retakes and in that booth with the earphones on and trying to recapture the excitement of doing it on stage. And then you're exhausted and you go to this party and now you're confronted with, we're going to close anyway. So, it didn't cause for the best celebration.
But it's pretty funnily written by Jim Canning because
Very.
Jim was pretty innocent. So he's just completely shocked that something like this could happen. And he writes it from that point of view.
Yeah, he really expressed it well.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, we've got one more. It says the last picture show came out in 1971. Were you excited about its success with Grease?
I'll jump in there only because I just saw it again at the Academy Museum here in Los Angeles just a couple of months ago. And I don't think we ever thought about it in terms of Grease, ever, not even in our remotest imagination. But it is a brilliant film. It is extraordinary. But no, I mean, that is a completely different take on life in a small town in Texas. And I don't think it has anything to do with Grease. But it's interesting that kind of art all gets created at the same time period.
But one thing that did happen is that Happy Days had been floating around, but nobody wanted it. And when Grease became a success, one of the first things that happened was that Life magazine decided to do an entire issue on the 50s, the 1950s, and calling Grease the father of the revival of the 1950s. And then one of the studios decided, okay, then let's buy Happy Days. So Grease instigated several things, and we didn't quite realize it at the time.
Somebody was asking me, but didn't American Graffiti came along after Grease?
No, that was another one of those that got greenlit because of Grease.
Yeah. Because that's probably the closest piece of art, if you want to use the word art for Grease, but that's the closest vehicle to Grease in terms of capturing what was going on in the youth of America at the time. I mean, each of them is localized in the particular place. I mean, that was localized in California. We were localized in a school in Chicago. So,
but when you think of all the foreign productions that have been done and are being done, all the different languages. I went to Mexico to see it. Was called Vaselina. I went down there for the opening. Jim wasn't able to go down. He went to a lot of the openings, but I went for that. And afterwards, I speak Spanish, so I talked to all the kids, told them how great they were. One of them asked me, now the thing is, I don't know, what did they relate to about the 50s in Mexico? What was it? I don't think they had the same kind of Elvis Presley 50s that we did, but it didn't matter. You know, they were caught up in it. And one of the actors asked me afterwards, I said, when I said how good they were, they said, are we good enough to do it on Broadway? And I said, well, how many of you speak English? And there was dead silence. And then somebody said, oh, we never thought of that.
Um, what do you, do we have more questions, or can I ask Carole and Barry questions?
I think you have time to ask one more. That'd be perfect.
Okay. So I'm just curious, what do you think, either one of you, Barry and Carole, and Barry, maybe start with you. What do you think Grease did to your life and trajectory as an actor?
Oh, I think it changed it immensely because of the first Tony nomination and how controversial all that was at the time. And I'm sure that's mentioned. We talked about that in the book. The fact that we were all sort of, I don't want to say it. Yes, I'll say it. We were all sort of hot young guys and girls. And, you know, and we'd strut out of the theater at night and go to the bars. And we garnered an awful lot of attention from the New Yorkers at the time, you know, I think I even went out for drinks with somebody, and Nuria was sitting next to me. You know, that was the kind of thing. Broadway Joe Namath came backstage, you know, with his girlfriend. And
you're getting to escort Elizabeth Taylor to one of our Grease lunches.
And I was the only one there, right, Tom?
This is a very funny thing, those of you who read the book, because everybody has different memories of the same moment. There were approximately 16 people there, and Barry remembers that he was the only one.
How self-centered actors can be.
I am.
Let's be generous. How self-focused an actor can be.
Yes, okay.
But it is pretty funny because Barry and I had this conversation when we were editing the story, and I asked him what his memories. He said, "What? There were other people there?" And then not only were there other people there were two large tables. He just happened to be seated next to Elizabeth Taylor, or across from her, I can't remember.
I think she was on one side and Burton was on the other.
Right.
And Susan.
And Burton's girlfriend was on the other side of the table, that nobody knew it was his girlfriend. And I started.
No, we all knew, Barry. You're the one that didn't know. So you proceeded to flirt with her all night.
Of course.
But yeah. We knew.
Anyway, all of this is in the book. Grease, tell me more, tell me more, buy it.
Yes. Bottom line, if you want the skinny, you got to get the book. So Carole, you get to have the last word. How did Grease affect your life?
In a big way. You know, I came into it, you know, from a different place, both in my life and in my career. And I had the opportunity to play Louisa in the Fantastics for 2 years. And that was a discipline, you know, to learn how to bring a thing to life every single night for 2 years. But what I wanted was a Broadway show. I thought if I could only get a good role in a Broadway show, then I would feel like I've really sort of landed on my feet and maybe that I really know what I'm doing. And it happened. It happened in an atmosphere of so many people with so much energy and passion. And once we really got kicked off and we knew we were sort of on safe ground, everyone took a deep breath and began to love being there instead of just worrying about what was going to happen tomorrow. And the whole atmosphere changed and became, from my point of view, extremely nourishing. And the reality would just hit me, you know, every once in a while. Oh my God, we're running in a Broadway show. And I'm so grateful to every single person in it, because I don't think any one of us was responsible for that. We were all responsible for that. We took care of each other. Certainly there were people who stood out. Certainly there were people who deserved the attention that they got. Barry, certainly you were one of them. But I think we became even more of a family and more of a team once we stopped worrying about where the next paycheck was coming from, and we really got in it and played it and did it and made it work. I'm telling you, when I walked out there in that skirt, that poodle skirt, I thought, well, someday I'll walk out like this and I'll actually be a real star, and that's why I'll get this acclaim. But it wasn't about me. It was about the skirt that was so perfect that people were pointing at it and screaming, because there were women in the audience. They'd had that skirt and they recognized it right away. But
Yeah,
that's what
Carol made her entrance in the skirt and got huge ovation, which she said it wasn't me, it was the skirt. I remember when you said that.
Yeah. But
But let me say one thing. I think it's an interesting choice that Ken and Tom and everybody involved made very early on to make it into an ensemble piece, and nobody stood out. I mean, you might have had a good night. I mean, you might have had some cred, in the street or something, but you always kept it as a family, as a group, as two gangs. And I think if we had been singled out as, well, it's the show that Carole Demas is the star of, or Barry Bostwick, or Adrienne Barbeau, I don't think it would have had the legs that it's had, because you guys, you kept it at a really, I don't know, generic's not the thing, but the right level. And I hated every moment of you guys doing that.
But
there's so much more from this show, and
thank you, Barry. But it's very interesting, because one of the things the show didn't have in the little gem that we saw in Chicago was a structure. Danny and Sandy were in the ensemble, but they weren't craftily structured to be the lead characters. So when Tom went to work on it, that was one of the things. And Jim and Warren were very cooperative, and it was and even to start that process, even before Tom, they agreed on Tom, Jim had already written Summer Nights. So that was in the works, but it was done in such a way that, and I don't mean to discredit your performance, but it was done in such a way that it wasn't Barry Bostwick starring in Grease, or Barry Bostwick and Carole Demas starring in Grease. It was everybody, because everybody had their moment, and Tom worked that out beautifully. George Abbott, the legendary producer-director who I apprenticed with, came down to see a preview. He invented the boy meets girl, boy loses girl structure. And when I walked him out to his cab afterwards, he said, I think you're going to be a hit. And don't think I didn't notice that down under in it, you got the George Abbott boy meets girl, except it's in reverse.
If I could finish off here with Walter Bobby, who is one of our great friends and a major director on his own, and is responsible for that revival of Chicago that's long run now makes Grease look ridiculously short because it's just run forever. But this is a very short piece, and we can just finish off with this because I know we're out of time. But he finishes off the whole section that dealt with getting the show on, getting the show to Broadway, getting it open, and moving into what became our permanent home, the Royale Theater. And it finishes off with this. What I know is this: a good story needs conflict, and Grease had more than just conflict. It had crisis. Crisis in spades. Solved, scarred, healed, we emerged defiantly entertaining by opening night. Our troubles now seem too tedious to taint our memories. What we remember is that nothing could stop the magic happening in the rehearsal room, on stage, and finally in the audience. Magic is not knowing how the trick is done, not wanting to know. Magic is innocent, a blinding moment when something impossible looks real. Not a trick, but a wonder. That's what we had. We didn't really know how we did it. Creative freedom, mutual respect, and celebrating everyone's uniqueness created fire in our rehearsal room, so that when something wasn't working, it was a gut punch. We all wanted this, and we wanted it for each other as well. When good fortune enters your life, you pray it comes again. Sometimes it does. At the very least, there is joy recalling a time when it did. I believe in joy undeterred, profound joy. That is what happened with the original company of Grease. And that DNA has passed along to generation of greasers. I think that's a good way to stop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you
Everybody.
so much, everybody. Thank you. Have a great night.
Grease, tell me more, buy it.
Got the link in there. Also, too.
Bye.